I want to start this one off with a little bit of a story, uh, or an anecdote or something. So every year I do on Twitch my top 100 ranking streams. I rank my top 100 protagonists, my top 150 antagonists, and my top 100 fiction. And for many, many years, I did not include in my top 100. For a couple of years, actually, I didn't include even in the honorable mentions Digimon or Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's not because I didn't actually feel that strongly about them. It's because I devalued them because I was nostalgic about them. And it's interesting because... Well, I'll get there in a sec, actually. So, it's funny because, my partner, who I met in 2021 and started dating in early 2022, or the first half of 2022, she's gotten into, anime. She's relatively newer to anime than I am. I still wouldn't consider myself a veteran, but she's newer to it than I am. And the time came for her to check out stuff that I recommended that wasn't, Rakugo or Fate Zero or Hunter x Hunter or Haikyuu or something like that. It was time for maybe some deeper cuts. And so, I don't know how exactly it came about, but she really was into the idea of checking out Yu-Gi-Oh! And I said, hell yeah, I love Yu-Gi-Oh! I watched it as a kid, I was glued to my screen every day after school, and I adored it. And Yu-Gi-Oh! Had never been, like I said, up until that point, I think it was 2023, 2024, it had never been a story that I held in super high regard and thought that it was great. I just said I loved it, but it's not that great. I just love it because of nostalgia. There were some hype moments, there were some good characters. Overall, though, it's not that impressive. I went back and I rewatched Yu-Gi-Oh! With my partner. Her first time with it, my rewatch after at least 15 years. And holy shit, Yu-Gi-Oh! Is incredible. The characters, the theming, the incredible moments. Don't get me wrong, there is some problems with it, like every story will have, most stories will have. But I was shocked at how good it actually was, how well it held up, how I had actually come to underestimate it because I attributed what I felt about it to nostalgia. And it's interesting because a lesson I had to learn with that, after that, my partner tried out Digimon. Last year, a year and a half ago, the first 3 seasons of Digimon, and my god, believe it or not, Digimon was way better than I remembered. Way more emotional, way more raw and awesome in the character interactions. The relationships were incredible. The concepts, the characters were even more likable than I remembered. And it all came together for a story for the first 3 seasons that I adored. And so, this past year, I had no other choice but to be like, yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! and Digimon are in my top 100 fiction for this year. They gradually made their way up there. They were in my honorable mentions last year, I think, or 2025. For 2026, they're in there. And a lesson I kind of had to learn with regards to specifically to anime is that sometimes I would think back to my childhood and the shows I would watch, specifically the anime I would watch after I came home from school. And I would go, yeah, those were good it's the perfect kid show. It's good for me as a kid. It was great for that point in my life. But there was an inherent bias against it, or an inherent assumption against it, stating that it wouldn't be that good now, because I loved it as a kid. However, that's simply not true. The fact is, at any given point in your life, you are going to have favorite stories, and they will speak to you. Because your sensibilities change at different points of your life. It took me 3 or 4 times to love Monogatari, 3 or 4 times to love Evangelion. It happens all the time with everything, and I think nostalgia, with regards to stories, is a more extreme version of that. And I had to learn, in a pleasant way, I was very pleasantly surprised by it, that I was unfair against these stories that I did deeply love, but I felt like I loved them for irrational reasons, not to do with quality. And of course, there are times where you love something as a kid that wasn't very good, or you love something that you think is bad. That happens. It's it is what it is. That's what happens. But it's much more rare, I think, than people assume it is. And a lot of the time, something spoke to you when you were a kid because it was great. And if you revisit it as an adult, you will actually, with a more, I guess, maybe diverse palate or a more refined taste than you had when you were 10, you will realize that it's better than you remembered. Better. It does more, that it maybe speaks to you in ways it couldn't speak to you when you were a kid. And that's the beauty of nostalgia in certain ways. But what's funny is, like, I don't know why. I only had this blind spot with anime. I, for years, maintained that another childhood show, SpongeBob SquarePants, is one of my favorite shows of all time. Since I've been 10 or something, I thought that. And I maintained it. And I said all the stuff I'm saying to you now about anime with regards to SpongeBob. I said it about video games with regards to Paper Mario and Animal Crossing and Pokemon and Zelda. I've consistently said that nostalgia... People do not put as much value on nostalgia as they should with regards to stories. Nostalgia exists a lot of the time because something was good enough to speak to you. Yeah, it was when you were a kid. That doesn't mean it isn't incredible, though. And I see it happen all the time, actually. One of the greatest joys of content creation in my life that I've experienced, that I continue to be able to do, is experience stories that I happened to experience for the first time on stream, and people in chat were lucky enough to grow up with this stuff. With One Piece, with Naruto, Bleach, JoJo's, more recent, but even still, Tokyo Ghoul, and Dragon Ball. And one of my favorite things is to go through a stream and read a chapter and cry at it or be hyped at it and really talk about what really speaks to me about these stories and why they're so good. And for people in chat to be like, wow, I don't get me wrong, I loved this story, but I did not realize it was this good. This is speaking to me in a way that I didn't really think was possible. I think I put a limit on it, and now seeing you go through it for the first time, at this point in your life, me at my point in my life, I see that this story, no, it wasn't nostalgia goggles, it wasn't my kid self being irrationally loving of something. This story is simply just that good. And the beauty of stories is that you can unlock more when you experience them further down the line. I just think nostalgia is awesome, man. I think nostalgia is awesome. It can be really painful. It can be really painful sometimes as you think back to times in your life that you can't get back to, that are just this ephemeral memory, that are a reflection, on a little pond that if you reach into, you'll break it. The ripples will cause it to dissipate. And I find myself dwelling in nostalgia and sentiment very often, thinking about those times in a healthy way, but I would not be AJ if I wasn't nostalgic about the summers I spent with my cousins, playing Animal Crossing all day. And then my parents would say, the food's ready, we'd have a barbecue, and we'd rush out, we have some hamburgers. I don't eat hamburgers these days anymore. And then we'd come in and play Animal Crossing again. I yearn for the days where I would just, on my way to football/soccer practice, I would play Pokemon Diamond in my Nintendo DS on the car ride there, and I play it on the way back. And this one beautiful winter evening, December evening, my dad and I walked out of the gym after my practice, and the snow was just falling, the first snow of the year, with my Pokemon game in my hand, telling my dad about the Pokemon I just caught, and I've never really forgotten that moment. I remember when my dad first got me my first Zelda, my first 3D Zelda, The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and me and him would go all around Hyrule Field trying to understand how to progress the plot because we weren't familiar with Zelda. Nostalgia is so important. I know it's not important for everyone, but for me, it's everything. I don't think I would know who I am if I didn't... who I am in the present if I didn't reflect on who I was in the past. And that's still a part of me, of course. But there's a bit of a distance to it due to time that I think is important to never lose sight of. And I think that very much applies to stories. So, nostalgia is important, man. This stuff speaks to you not because the vast majority... I'm not saying this is all the time, but the vast majority of the time, it doesn't speak to you when you were a kid because you were a kid with no taste. It spoke to you because it was special. So I don't know. If you ever feel like checking out something that you haven't checked out in 10, 12, 15 years because you're an adult now and you don't think it would hold up, I mean, give it an episode or two, or give it a few hours if it's a video game. And really give it a go. Because I think you might be surprised at how good your nostalgia radar is, or how good your taste was. I think we can all be guilty of undervaluing certain things because we undervaluing the quality of something because we undervalue what nostalgia actually is, and fail to realize that nostalgia does have qualitative properties with regards to the quality of a work. And I think that's something that I've really realized in recent years, but I think it's sort of important to communicate because it's a big part of me. It's a big part of me. It's a big part of what I try to get across in my content and such. So yeah, feel free to share some of your nostalgic games or series that you've realized are just as good or better later in life, or some of your nostalgic memories. I sometimes dwell in nostalgia. It's why maybe my favorite character of all time, is someone for whom a quote applies to him. Let me get that exact quote. I can remember it. A slave to sentiment, even after a millennia. I am a slave to sentiment. But sentiment and nostalgia, they're far more valuable than people say. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.